ADHD is indiscriminate of gender. If we look for naughty boys, we'll find naughty boys. If we look for inattentive girls, we'll find inattentive girls. If we reconstruct our thoughts and go and look for the hyperactive woman, we'll find the hyperactive woman, the impulsive woman. We just don't look, and society hasn't looked over the years. So there isn't the gender split that history would say.
Phil Anderton PHD has over 20 years of experience in the field of ADHD
and has assessed over 50,000 people.
The founder of ADHD 360, Europe's largest ADHD organization.
He has a wealth of lived experience rivaled by no other.
He is the ADHD expert.
The impact of ADHD doesn't come from pure inattention. It comes from the emotional things that come downstream. Why is it that the lad next to you, who's perhaps not as bright as you, gets the answer right when the teacher asks your mate to look a fool because you haven't followed the lesson? And you build a life pattern of all of those things going on. You very soon get to be quite anxious about what's going on in your life, quite depressed, but not clinically depressed. You're actually situationally pissed off. Part of the diagnostic process is to look to see if the symptoms and impairment have been caused by trauma. We've got to flip that. What if the symptoms and impairment have caused trauma? And I don't think we understand that enough. I look back now and think, crikey, we didn't understand what we were doing.
Phil, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It was about a year ago we first met.
It was.
We were at a festival under a big tent, and you were interviewing me and a couple of other people. And I remember thinking at the time to go to the effort of hiring out a tent, organising all of these ADHD people together. You must have huge motivation towards the topic. So what is your mission?
Wow. That's a big question to open with, isn't it? What's Phil Anderton's mission? I think it is really to make sure people who deserve help get the help they deserve. I think there's a national, you could call it an international injustice against ADHD. And we've a long way to go, haven't we? We've got a lot of work to do for people to get the help they need. And I think that's the goal, is to have better services, more accessible services, and for people to be understood so they can go and lead their best life.
And you were in the police force for how many years? 27
years, man and boy.
27, that's a huge career. And do you think that gave you a unique vantage point when coming to look at ADHD as a condition?
Unique, certainly different, perspective difference. I could look back on my policing career and think how many people who had ADHD had not got the help and support they'd needed from me and from others. And then as I grew in policing and educated myself a fair bit, starting to look at perspectives slightly differently. So I think policing back in the 80s especially was based on the premise that people were choosing to do wrong. But what if that person wasn't choosing to do wrong? They were doing wrong because they were poorly. Does that give us a different construct to the whole criminal justice system? Does that give us a different opinion on how we should look for the outcome of any proceedings? Is punishment appropriate, or is help and support appropriate? Now, as an 18-year-old cop in Oxford in 1980, there were never any of those thoughts in my head. But, roll forward 25 years as a senior police officer, I do think that gave me a perspective which has gone forward into forming what we now see as ADHD 360 and Phil Anderton's mission, as we described it earlier.
And how many people do you think ADHD 360 has assessed now in total?
53,000.
Wow, okay. So you've got a lot of experience.
Fair bit.
In terms of what you know now about ADHD, do you see any particular traits that might, if left unmanaged and undetected, lead to criminal behaviour?
Yeah, there's a lot. And again, we as society have got to challenge the premise of the criminal code. If it's about choice, then we're getting the wrong idea. We recently, one of the case studies we've recently published was of a school teacher who, to be able to focus and concentrate enough to teach, had to take unlawful drugs to affect her brain to be able to get that focus that her ADHD wasn't allowed to have. And she couldn't get treatment anywhere. And she approached her GP for help. And the GP said, well, you shouldn't be anywhere near children because you're taking cocaine. Now that at that very point, we're against the criminal code. We're breaking the law and so on. And yet, within 4 weeks of that incident and her coming into our clinic, she's never touched cocaine again because she's now got the medicine to help her. There's other types of criminal behaviour, impulsive crime. One lad I interviewed in prison in Manchester, who was in prison for thumping a man who just assaulted his mum. And he broke the guy's nose, so that contravened the criminal code. But that impulsivity could have been driven by his passion to defend his mum, plus impulsivity through his undiagnosed, as it was then. We diagnosed him on the day in prison, his ADHD. So there's many different trajectories where people come into policing. And we shouldn't forget driving either, and the lack of safety behind the wheel of a car if your ADHD is untreated. So there's a whole mix, there's a whole set of patterns that I don't think we appreciate fully.
Do you think there's a correlation there between the traits of ADHD and just generally making lifestyle choices that many would call getting up to no good?
Yeah. Lifestyle choices is a great expression for somebody with ADHD, and that you can go from poor choice of partner, poor choice of occupation, poor decision first thing in the day, whether you've got a whole stream of lifestyle choices or you make one big choice that goes massively wrong. But it is inexplicably linked to untreated and unmanaged ADHD that we see poor lifestyle choices.
I wonder if the emotional dysregulation aspect of ADHD combined with RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, particularly also with the impulsivity that can come with ADHD, you can probably quite easily see how maybe even after a few alcoholic drinks have been consumed, if a man or a woman gets triggered in a bar or a social setting, it doesn't take a genius to see how that could lead to a fight.
Well, when we have an academy at 360, and there's an academy on this week, and when we teach about what it's like to have ADHD, to be a person with ADHD, I've coined this phrase SPO, situationally pissed off. And if you don't understand yourself and you've never understood yourself, and you know that other people don't understand you, and you can't work out why life is so hard for you, why are you as bright and clever as you are, but you can't pass the exam? Why is it that the lad next to you, who's perhaps not as bright as you, gets the answer right when the teacher asks, but you're made to look a fool because you haven't followed the lesson? Or the work you hand in is late and it's answered the wrong question because you weren't concentrating when the question was set. And you build a life pattern of all of those things going on. You very soon get to be quite anxious about what's going on in your life, quite depressed, but not clinically depressed. You're actually situationally pissed off. And all of that is a powder keg, isn't it? And as you say, the DSM doesn't, the manual for assessing mental health doesn't talk in ADHD terms about emotional dysregulation or rejection to sensitivity. And it damn well should. It's so far out of date, and the NICE guidelines are corrupted by not having these considerations that we're actually statistically looking for the wrong thing anyway. The impact of ADHD doesn't come from pure inattention. It comes from the emotional things that come downstream, in my view. And we should be looking to harness the impairment that comes from those things as much as anything else. So it's a powder keg. And it's from the age of about 6, people can remember the challenges, the struggles, the difficulties that they've had. And you go through to whatever age in life that we get to assess and diagnose people. You know, our oldest patient's 87. We had a 50-year-old patient write a Trustpilot review last week saying, "You've changed my life at the age of 50. And I just think, wow, that's a privilege, isn't it? You know, 50 years of suffering, 50 years of situationally being pissed off, not knowing what's going on. And then we can get into it. So yeah, so as you describe, emotional dysregulation, sensitivity to being rejected, a bit of impulsivity. Whether we need alcohol to make that any worse, God only knows, because it's bad enough as it is, that we've got a low bar for tolerance, whereas other people may have a higher bar because it's been chipped away every day. And we miss that a lot in the way that we describe ADHD.
Seems like the perfect storm in a way. We talk about RSD on this podcast a lot, and the description of the emotional response is either internalized sadness or rage. And that rage can be internalized. You keep it internal, you shut down, you go nonverbal, or you can be quite verbally abusive. You can shout, say really nasty things to those really close to you. But I suppose that's just one half of the rage. It's probably, in a lot of people, when paired with that impulsivity, it might not be internalized, and it might not just be verbal.
Yeah.
It could quite easily transition into physical.
Like the lad in the prison in Manchester that we spoke to, who had seen this guy reject him and his mum and then physically attack his mum. And that was it. Bang, wallop, gone. There was no control over those emotions. And the greatest example of that, I think, is the tension between school and home for a kid with ADHD who is trying their best to behave at school, really works hard to mask their struggles, doesn't want to out themselves as not being able to focus and concentrate, works really, really hard, gets home and is absolutely shattered, exhausted, emotionally bereft of, there's nothing left in the tank. And then mum or dad say, well, don't put your bag there, hang your jacket up and get your homework done. And in the safety of their own home, wallop, emotional dysregulation is allowed in that safe space. So the parents are talking about what's going on with their child, school saying, we don't see anything, but you've got this kid who's trying to do their very, very best all the time. And you've got the disparity. And that's where a lack of understanding of emotional dysregulation and sensitivity to rejection plays a major part that is just not part of the process. It's actually not part of the national system for ADHD assessment. And that's just plainly wrong.
With RSD, it seems like such a visceral reaction that's almost knee-jerk. There's no warning. If you are someone with ADHD and you do suffer with RSD, it's an instant response to a perceived or real criticism. Is there anything schools could do or parents to recognize that and see that in young kids at a young age to maybe put things in place to intercept and change the trajectory of that person's life and therefore to avoid criminality?
Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is try and avoid them blowing a fuse anyway, regardless of where that is. And that's where more information, better quality of information can help. You know, we coach and talk to parents about when your kid comes home, really how important is that homework when what they want to do is collapse on the sofa and do nothing or play on the Xbox for an hour and decompress from school. That might not be what you want them to do, but that's what they need. In the moment a parent sees that, they can give the child that space and then things start to run a bit more smoothly. You know, similarly with a child on medication whose appetite might be suppressed, you must sit down as a family at 6 o'clock and we must all eat a square meal together and enjoy it because that's what society says we should do. Well, the child might not be hungry at 6 o'clock. Their hunger might not kick in till 8 o'clock. So plate their meal up, alter the timetable of the whole family construct. Doesn't matter what you do. Don't try and punish and force somebody to eat at the time that society says you should eat. And you'll see the tension start to float away. And those simple things, school. I worked with an amazing guy, Matt Morgan, an American wrestler, huge mountain of a man, but he just a lovely man to work with, very gentle despite being a professional wrestler. And he talked about his school teacher recognized his concentration would wane after about 20 minutes. So she used to give him a basketball and he'd go out and he'd throw the hoops for 10 minutes and then come back in. And it was only those regular breaks in his teaching that allowed him to engage in school at all. He'd have totally disengaged if she hadn't have got him. And the teacher was criticised for him having breaks and being able to throw the basketball at the hoop. But her argument was, I might lose him for those 10 minutes, but if I don't lose him for those 10 minutes, I'll lose him for the whole day, if not the week, if not his educational career. So we can build in better skills. You know, teachers don't get taught about ADHD. They don't get taught how to manage ADHD in the classroom. And therefore, why do we expect them to get it right? You know, and those schools of old that used to have regular exercise breaks and regular change in the way that we do things, as opposed to making everybody sit down all day, every day, you know, that they've been successful. So, yeah, there's a lot we can do, a hell of a lot.
Do you see even I guess starting from that young age, but even through to adulthood, do you see the difference in how undiagnosed ADHD might manifest in women compared to men?
Oh, that's a classic. That's a classic question, and there was a Loose Women episode that we were involved with, and one of the comments made by one of the presenters was on the different manifestations from men to women, and we still use that clip in training in the academy. And young Archie Reed, one of our managers in the organisation who teaches, he says, "Yeah, that was the only thing they got wrong, was the difference in the manifestation between men and women." Who says you can't have inattentive men, and who says you can't have hyperactive women? He says, well, what are we looking for, and what do we find when we're looking for it? And he's absolutely right. You know, it's ADHD, and we can talk about the title of ADHD, but ADHD is indiscriminate of gender. But if we look for naughty boys, we'll find naughty boys. If we look for inattentive girls, we'll find inattentive girls. If we reconstruct our thoughts and go and look for the hyperactive woman, we'll find the hyperactive woman, the impulsive woman. We just don't look, and society hasn't looked over the years. I've worked with many, both men who are inattentive and dreamers, and women who are impulsive and hyperactive. So there isn't the gender split that history would say that there is. When I first started 20 odd years ago working in ADHD, there were a common swathe of psychiatrists across the globe who saw it as a boys' thing.
And what about ADHD and addiction? Do they go hand in hand?
They're big cousins, without a doubt. The prefrontal cortex isn't working properly. Excuse me. There's a lack of dopamine in the key pathways where we need dopamine to be working to give us a fully effective set of brain patterns. If you can't get that or aren't exposed to that medically, and you can't cope without that, and then you impulsively are introduced to something like cocaine, and you take a bit of cocaine and wallop, it does exactly what you need, you've got a cousin, and you've got a cousin for life. We used to interview prisoners in the cells about their ADHD and their drug taking, and prisoners would use expressions like, there were 5 of us took cocaine, boss. The other 4 were monged and flying from the ceiling. I sat down and watched Coronation Street for the first time ever. It just slowed me right down. It switched off the tumble dryer in my head and allowed me to concentrate. The school teacher with her cocaine, cannabis, alcohol, smoking, cigarettes, nicotine, all have an effect on that prefrontal cortex and that dopamine. Whether it's chemically or it's actually a dopamine hit by doing something wrong, doing something risky, or a combination of the two. There's an inextricable link. And I was really fortunate many years ago to be introduced to a guy called Professor Tim Willins in America. And I don't know if you've ever looked at Tim's work. He's the world expert on ADHD and substance abuse. And the links are profound.
I mean, I first heard those 4 letters in an AA meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous. Like so many other people on the podcast, you're drawn towards something just to bring you up, but ultimately you just bring yourself so far down because you have an inability to stop, or certainly I do. I guess it's that you have a drink and you activate this hyper focus, and the only thing on the other end of that hyper focus is the next drink. And you get the next drink and you just move the goalposts further and you want the next one. And within a very short space of time, because of that impulsivity, combined with that hyper focus on one thing, the next drink, and if something gets in the way of that next drink, you can get very agitated. And that's one of the main reasons I stumbled across those 4 letters. Speaking to so many people in active and recovered addiction, and those 4 letters kept coming up. But I suppose it must be frustrating to, even if you get a diagnosis and then you've got to wait for a long time to get the right medication. Do you think that's why many people fall back into addiction? Because it is simply easier. It's just less friction to self-medicate.
It really interesting, truly, genuinely interesting to discuss that, because classic treatment pathways would say you've got to be clean for a number of weeks before you can receive treatment. If you're not making an everyday choice, you're taking something to survive, to perform, 12 weeks, that's not going to happen. And the recidivism rate there is incredibly high. And Tim Willins taught me that you've got to actually not wait that time. You've got to appreciate if someone's got ADHD and they're abusing substances or they're addicted to something, they're not going to be able to stop and give you 3 months before they'll actually trust you to start treatment. That's not going to happen. You've got to marry the two up. And there's lovely stories of my work and where Tim supported our understanding of that, which is against the norm in society's treatment of ADHD. But I think we've also got to actually look at the construct of what is an addict, because automatically in this conversation we talked about addict to alcohol or drugs. But a person with ADHD who needs a dopamine burst could be addicted to anything. And if we can turn that addiction into a positive addiction, the hyperfocus as it's called, perhaps, then we can actually still feed the addiction that we know we're not going to beat the battle with, but we can do that in a positive way and get positive outcomes. And I think we've lost in society somewhere the ability to accept that sort of geeky want to do something that is now put down by society. The easy one for me as an old man now in my 60s, when I was a kid, I was a train spotter and I would go anywhere to look at trains. Now these days you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't dare do that because you'd just be you'd be ostracized.
Right.
But in those days, people did, and the autistic passion for something that people had in the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s, planes, trains, automobiles, is almost by society not allowed anymore. You're weird if you're passionate about something. And maybe we've got to rethink some of that and rethink how we allow people to be addicted, but not always to unlawful substances or things that are going to cause trouble.
A quick word from our sponsors to address a big ADHD issue, the notebook fallacy. We all convince ourselves that buying that one magic notebook will solve all of our problems, but it never does. Nor does the second one, or the third, or the 10th. Well, Tiimo app is more useful than having all the notebooks in the world. And what use are notebooks if you keep losing your pen anyway? Tiimo app has hugely helped me organize my chaotic life by offering the most user-friendly interface an organizational app has to offer. The difference is, it's designed by neurodiverse brains for neurodiverse brains. And you can tell. It's built to adapt to your neurodiverse way of thinking and be flexible to your way of planning. And now it's even more simple with the AI planning assistant. Tiimo now offers an incredible new voice transcribing service, making it even easier to use. A simple voice prompt when you have to plan something or something pops into your mind, and the new AI planning assistant hears it and transcribes it instantly into an easily digestible list of instructions for you to remember. Tiimo is here to help you simplify planning, build focus, and make life happen. No more decision paralysis. The new AI planning assistant makes it so quick and easy to insert information, you can do it before you've forgotten or been distracted. Give it a go and use the link in my bio for 30% off. Just a note though, this code is only applicable on the web browser, not on the smartphone. Then when Tiimo solves all of your problems, go ahead and use your notebooks for something useful, like propping up a wobbly table leg or mopping up a spilt coffee. Back to the episode. Well, special interests. I mean, when you find your special interest and you are enabled to take steps towards it without feeling different, then that's the sweet spot, I think. It's incredibly hard to get because, like you said, it is unusual if you have a special interest towards trains or something that falls outside the sort of parameters of normal. I think it's dangerous if your special interest is your addiction. I had a psychiatrist on here about a year ago. He said something that explained my entire life. He said people with ADHD struggle to maintain their life away from addiction because they forget how bad life got when they were in active addiction. Because of object permanence, the whole idea of something being out of sight, out of mind, and you can very much go through life and forget how bad drinking got for you. Yeah. So when that stress comes into your life and you need that vice, you need that escape, and that hyperfocus comes on towards that bottle of wine in the supermarket, you don't have that memory to draw on of how
Indeed.
bad that got. And I think it's so important. I mean, what's saved me in that situation is bringing that memory into my now and ensuring that I have something to look at in terms of evidence to remind me how terrible it was.
Ross Barkley talks about, and I've discussed this a lot with him, how one of the challenges for a person with ADHD is to bring their past performance to the present time, and that's exactly what you're talking about. Now, you've got in you as an individual an incredibly articulate way of looking at your addiction, your alcohol abuse, and bringing that forward, and where that's come from, how that's manifested for you, is really strong. And the way that you talk about it for other people, I think, is really strong as well, because I think it helps other people. But we have to recognise there is a huge challenge for someone with ADHD to look at that past and bring that to the present, especially in terms of addiction like you're talking about. How bad was that? Well, I can't remember, so therefore it doesn't matter. We'll just crack on and do what I think I need to do. But it's also relevant to, say, the child who was told yesterday you needed to bring a pen. You didn't bring a pen to class, so you're going to get a detention. You haven't brought a pen today, so you're going to get another detention. I told you yesterday. Well, that child can't recall what they were told yesterday to bring that forward to today. And so it's a whole systemic lack of understanding that you've been told it once, therefore you'll never need to be told it again. You've experienced it once, therefore you'll never need to forget, or you'll never be able to forget that experience. So why can't you relate back to when that was really shitty for you? Well, I can't, because I've got ADHD, and that's and we've got a cycle now. We're on a hamster wheel, and it's very difficult to get off. You've got off it, and that's really admirable. But a lot of people do struggle to get off that hamster wheel.
I always wonder why we do always live in the now, because I think it's easy to say people with ADHD, we live in the now and we only see what's in front of us, and anything that's in our past or future ceases to exist. So we struggle to remember achievements. Therefore, we have imposter syndrome. It's quite easy to say that, but I always wonder why we live in the now, why we are so eagle-eyed and alert to dangers today, right now.
But are we only living in the now? Because if the emotional rejection and the sensitivity is because what the building blocks that have got us to the now, we might be defending against those to live in the now, but we're still actually very acutely aware in our subconscious of what's gone before. And I think all of this boils down, Alex, to I still don't think we've got everything boxed off, that we know exactly what's going on. The complexity of the human mind is way beyond a textbook with a single dimension of what's going on. And we still rely on a single textbook to understand what's going on. And I think we're way beyond that. And, you know, since the latest DSM-5 and the NICE guidelines, I think people like yourselves, ourselves, are unpicking the complexity of ADHD, that those who are charged with the responsibility to provide services for people are still not understanding, and they can't understand why is the demand so high? Why are there so many more people with ADHD? It's because we're now bringing people to the fore with confidence, because we're starting to rewrite the rule book a little bit, and I think we've got to continue to do that because it's a big challenge.
I'm truly believe that people with ADHD, I certainly subscribe to this from my experiences. We're living in survival mode all the time, and it depends how much weight you want to put to that theory that kids with ADHD were exposed to all of those nasty comments, 20,000 comments, stop fidgeting, stop doing that, just be normal. And those compound to create a brain that is similar to someone who has complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And as a consequence of that, as an adult, you're always living in this state of survival. You're always in the now, because you're always terrified of being triggered, and you're always on alert. It turns you into a people pleaser, overcommitter, avoider. And I guess it's RSD at the center of it all. And when something does trigger you, someone does give you a real or a perceived criticism, and that is what tips you over the edge into that quite passive, quiet person into explosive rage, and you get called Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde. Or if you're in a different situation and that lashes out into physical violence in that moment. I mean, do you feel like So much of the link between ADHD and criminality could be explained by RSD.
Oh, you've gone into about 5 different dimensions of complexity there, and I'll answer your question. But first of all, you talk about trauma, and a part of the diagnostic process is to look to see if the symptoms and impairment have been caused by trauma. But we've got to flip that. What if the symptoms and impairment have caused trauma? And I don't think we understand that enough. I don't think we explore that enough. That situationally pissed off from the age of 6, being able to recall to whatever age, 30, 40, 50, 60, or even just a teenager, there is trauma there. And as you say, trying to suppress that constant inner chimp that says you're not good enough, you're not going to win, you're not going to get there, you're not going to do this, be careful, watch it, don't do this, oh, don't do that, you can't do this, you can't settle, you can't do that, you can't relax, you can't do this. Why is my brain thinking about 3 things? What's that music that's playing? That's distracted me. And they're in heartbeat. We've got an incredibly complex position, and yet our criminal code doesn't take any account of that complexity. You've made a binary decision to steal. You've made a very binary decision to put cocaine up your nose, or to pass cocaine on to someone else, or to drive that car too fast. And as somebody that was charged with the responsibility to enforce the law for all those years, I look back now and think, crikey, we didn't understand what we were doing. And we still don't. And we've got to look more at the correlation between someone's mental well-being and their mental health and the physical attributes of society, and what people do and can do in society that we do think is unlawful and unwanted and unwarranted. But instead of thinking they've made a binary decision to do something, let's have some understanding about what got them to there, and then see that as something that we should actually try and help them with. Sending somebody to prison who's got ADHD without assessing, diagnosing and treating their ADHD is just taking them out of society and waiting for them to come back out and jump back on the same hamster wheel and go back around it again. And where does that get us? Absolutely nowhere. We achieve nothing through that process. And I did some work with the probation service in Leeds a couple of years ago. And most of this fascinates me, and it takes your question one stage further. When somebody comes out from prison, they come out on license, and there are conditions to that license. Most breaches will put you back in prison. And if you breach your license, that's it. You're back in the hamster wheel and off you go, the revolving door of the front of the prison. Most breaches are for not keeping your appointments. Well, what do people with ADHD struggle to do? Keep their appointments. Most breaches aren't for going back and committing crime again. It's for not keeping your appointment, not turning up with the probation service on time on the right day. Well, this is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense that we don't have the understanding that we can actually help somebody. It's like, how do we help someone get to their ADHD assessment? We ring them, we call them, we text them, we email them, we send a pigeon, we send an owl. It doesn't matter. We've got to get them there. And if we leave them to their own devices, they won't get there on their own, no matter how motivated they are. Why don't we do the same for probation service meetings so that we're not breaching people? We're just not understanding the impact of ADHD in that whole mental health, criminal justice space. And we're not implementing what is just damn good practice to help people. And yet we want to build more prisons. We want to let people out early. We're missing the point here. We can actually stop people going in. We're trying to get better at pulling people out the stream when they're drowning, but we're not looking why they're falling in. And we've got to do that. We've got to really start to make the links early doors as to why somebody may be going that way. And we can see them early. We can see them at school. We can see the kids who are going to end up. You ask any teacher, I knew he was going to be a problem. What did you do about it? I didn't know what to do. Didn't understand it.
Do you think, therefore, ADHD is the antithesis of balance? And do you think humans need balance in order to be happy?
Do you know, I went round the Air and Space Museum about 20 years ago in Washington, and it was something like the 80th anniversary of flight for the first time, and there was a big Wilbur and Orville Wright exhibition, and I love aviation, and I was reading their school reports which were on display, and without a shadow of a doubt, both of those gentlemen had ADHD, without a shadow, you know. So did they give balance? No, they upset the whole world. They invented flight. Were they happy? I would hope so. They pulled off something that was totally unique. And then you get to thinking about whether somebody's an entrepreneur and upsetting the balance. And, we've talked about entrepreneurial in other interviews and other work. So do we need balance? Absolutely bloody not. We need people that upset balance. But we need that to be society relevant, accepted by society, and for that person to be comfortable, more comfortable than perhaps we are at the moment with, the correlation between ADHD and entrepreneurial stuff is fascinating. And we're doing some work with that at the moment. And an entrepreneur is, by definition, probably not in the balance because they're going out and doing something completely unique that's never been done before for the first time. So do we need balance? No. Do we need happiness? Absolutely. People need to be happy. And I think that's the part that matters, is that if you don't fit, can you be happy not fitting? Can people be happy around you when you don't fit? And people talked about, I don't want to label my child, I don't want the label. But actually, I challenge that. I think that if you understand yourself and you can therefore allow other people to understand you more, people are more tolerant. And if not, they should be. And therefore, there is a balance about that moment, but that still allows you to be not the balance that everybody would expect. So entrepreneurs, inventors, the chaos that needs to actually make things happen. I think if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have half the things that we cherish in the modern day. We look at sports stars. How many of our sports stars, our legends, are probably ADHD and didn't have a balance. They needed to do something different, need to go out and do something different. Lewis Hamilton talks about his ADHD. Whether he's ADHD or not, I don't know. But he talks about where he gets his passion, his drive, his commitment, his willingness, his almost recklessness to go and do something that's never been done before. So do we need balance? No, we don't. But what we need is a happy balance. And society needs to address that, to allow us to still have entrepreneurs, but happy entrepreneurs, to allow us to have inventors, but happy inventors. Let's get James Dyson and screen him for ADHD. Yeah. Richard Branson, let's actually get him and screen him for ADHD. Everyone says, oh, he's definitely got it. I don't think he's ever been screened for it. He's been screened for dyslexia. But let's get these people and just think, well, society has relied on you to change the construct of vacuuming or record production or whatever it is. So we can't accept the balance, or we'd always live in caves and we'd still be drawing on the walls of the caves. But we have to be happy in the way that we address it. And I think that's where we can make a difference.
It's interesting. The ADHD entrepreneurs, the high achieving men and women with ADHD, I know, the output that they're giving to the world is tipping the balance. They're doing incredible things. But there's nothing balanced about them as people. And in fact, that's the thing that is driving them to do extraordinary results. To them, often work-life balance is just, it's a myth because they understand that their hyper-focus and obsession towards their mission is so strong. And whether that's healthy or not, but there's very often little balance within their life other than their mission, which is what has enabled them to achieve the incredible output that is tipping the balance societally. When you were in the police force, you must have seen a lot of trauma. So taking this all into account, Phil, and where would you like to see the world of ADHD, schools, the prison system, education in 10 years?
10 years. Well, that's not that far away, is it? 10
Time
years.
goes fast.
It does. And, I've been in this for 20 odd years now. And I thought when I set out that we'd boil the whole ocean and sort everything out. And obviously we sit here and still haven't managed to do that. Where do I think? I think we've got to be joined up. And a person's need can be met by education, health, social welfare, criminal justice system, if it's wrapped around the individual. And we don't do that. We're not good at it. But nobody's going to give us a blank sheet of paper to start again. We have society. We have it constructed in the way that it is. So in 10 years, are we going to really change everything? I doubt it. Could we? Should we? Should we have a really good go? Yes, we should. And, we have a passport to travel. What about if we have a passport that explains us? and actually says, that I am neurodiverse, I have got cancer, I am short, and therefore I feel different to a tall person. Whatever it is, we have a passport that explains us, and people actually understand that reading your passport and understanding your passport is a professional discipline. So it says in your passport you're neurodiverse. What neurodiversity? I'm autistic, or I've got ADHD. Well, how can I help you? How can I enable you as your school teacher? How can I enable you as your healthcare provider? As opposed to, we haven't got the money to spend on ADHD, so we're not going to do it. Or I don't believe in ADHD in the classroom, so we're not going to do anything different for you. And why can't we wrap excellence around an individual? We wrote a school guide for ADHD, and everything we wrote in that guide, whether it's the strategic level, the tactical level, or the operational level in the classroom, if it was actually applied to everybody, not just the person with ADHD, would improve the standard of education and outcomes for people. And I think sometimes we just miss the point that treating people differently because they're different is completely different to treating people fairly because they're unique as a human being. So in 10 years, where would I like us to be, that we had an understanding of the individual and we actually were able to professionally respect that?
And all of the compounding effects of feeling different based off messaging from people that don't understand you is going to see huge mitigating differences to, I imagine, people committing crime, because they'll have that awareness so much younger.
Absolutely. And there's a great story, I've told it frequently, of myself and my colleague Steve Brown. He was a sergeant in the police with me. And we were at a parenting conference being run by an organisation called Addis, and it was in Southport. And this lady, as we walked in full uniform, a brave move right at the start of our ADHD work, we walked into this auditorium and this lady approached us and went at Steve, and she went at him. Very ADHD, no respect to personal space, in his face, and telling him off for not replying to her emails. You want to work with ADHD, you're no good, you didn't reply to my emails. What's the point of you saying you want to work with ADHD if you're not even going to reply to an email? Blah, 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 giving it all of this. Steve physically took one step back and said to this lady, I really have never seen a single email from you. How can I help? And who did you email? She says, I've emailed you. Here, look. Stephen Brown. He says, no, I'm Stephen with a PH, not a V. I've never got your emails. And he had the ability. It was a seminal moment in our careers together. He took that one step physically back, put some distance in, and apologized without reservation, but said, I've not ignored you. How can I help? Now, that was as a consequence of some coaching we'd had on treating people with ADHD who were a bit wound up and emotionally dysregulated. Imagine if we all had those skills, as opposed to just getting more and more wound up and judging that person and making decisions based on judgments that would have been inappropriate. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. And I thought, wow, I've just learned a lot there by watching Steve do that. And it was one of those privileged moments where you do anchor back and you go back to it and you just think, yeah, well done, lad. That was excellent. And if only more people understood so they could deploy those skills in their professional context, it would make a big difference.
Brilliant advice. I've been doing the podcast for 2 years now, and the overarching real key bit of advice is to just find those moments to put a pause in between whatever the event is and your response to it. And that applies to addiction, that applies to whether you're going to jump into that new relationship, that applies to whether you're going to buy that domain for that new hobby that you've just got really excited about. Put that pause, that breathing space, really don't let that impulsivity win. And, you know, there's various ways to do that, but that metaphorical idea shelf, just put the idea, shelf it, don't take that step towards this new idea right now, sleep on it. Because 9 times out of 10, if you do that, you put that gap between the thought and the action. 9 times out of 10, it's a no, or it's a non-action, which can save so much money, hardship,
Emotion,
yes. Yeah.
Barclay talks about think, pause, act. And people with ADHD don't have that middle bit. Between think and act, there isn't the pause. So we can't put 30 people in a classroom with their ADHD and say, you don't have think, pause, act. Now you know that, you're going to pause. That's not going to work. It's just not. We can't change that whole mindset and the processes. But we can, with awareness, we can start to say, well, who's significant in your life that can help you with that pause? How could medical treatment help you with that pause? How could your own awareness start to help you with that pause? So you start to train and teach on better practices. Telling someone to pause ain't going to make any difference. So it's a whole redesign of the whole damn thing and how we can help somebody. And building the pause, you're absolutely right. The pause is huge. And the inability to pause is where the impulsivity wins. But life may lose when impulsivity wins. The car, the holiday, on an interview we did with a female patient, she talked about, and this was on camera, and she talked about the mortgage they've got in her family because she impulsively went and bought a house and took out a mortgage they couldn't afford. Now, that's not unique to her. That's incredibly common, or a car loan, or whatever it is that's caused debt and then hardship and what have you. If somebody had helped her pause, then it would have been a different outcome. And Berkeley's words are words of wisdom and brilliance, and always will be: think, pause, act. If the individual can't pause, how do we help make that happen? There's got to be something that we look to do.
In my story, and many addicts, that pause comes in the form of pick up a phone before you pick up a drink.
Yeah.
Like, call someone, let them know you're having this urge in this moment, get on the phone for 5 minutes. A lot of the time, that's enough for you to sort of come down from this hyper focus of that first drink. And I think it's so interesting to try and find dopamine to create your own pauses. And say you've got an idea for a new hobby and you're not sure if it's a boom or bust and whether to buy that domain or not. I feel like at the moment, ChatGPT can actually be a useful goal, because you can get your phone out and you can ask ChatGPT about it and whether it's a good idea and the processes you need to take in order to get that hobby off the ground. And you could have great fun doing this for half an hour. And that's actually given you a lot of dopamine, a lot of stimulation. And by the time you put your phone down half an hour later, you're done. You haven't spent the money
absolutely.
on the domain.
Absolutely. Well, we talk about the hobby graveyard, don't we? And the ADHD hobby graveyard reigns supreme.
Yes.
And the amount of money and hardship and heartache that comes from that hobby graveyard. And we've got our graphics guy at work, Tom Sullivan, who's an absolute genius with graphics, has got this amazing hobby graveyard graphic that is just a beautiful work of art that just describes this. And if we had a way of, Amazon, Amazon is brilliant. It's revolutionized shopping. Person with ADHD, add to basket, fill basket, shop, done. And I haven't even got off the toilet. There's no traipsing around the high street and rethinking it when. So we do have to have those kind of controls and help people get those controls where they're not going to get them themselves.
I'm excited to reveal your ADHD item underneath that cloth, but I just want to ask you a final question, Phil. What myths about ADHD would you like to bust here today?
Oh God, how long have you got? It's not all about naughty boys. You grow out of it. There's no hope. There's plenty of hope. There's nothing you can do about it. Medication's bad for you. All of those, I'd like to people just recognise they are stupid myths.
Yeah.
But the big one, if there is a big one, they're all kind of around the individual. The big one is for ministers and those who are charged with responsibility providing services. It costs more to not treat someone for ADHD than it does to treat them. And yet we've got commissioners of health boards around the country saying we can't afford to treat ADHD. If you don't, the overall cost to society just goes up and up and up. That's the biggest myth. This is an investor save for the nation. And that's the big corporate message we've got to send out. And it's been proven time and time again. We've just published a paper on it just to bring some UK numbers to it, as opposed to Danish numbers or Swedish numbers or American numbers. The return on the investment for treating someone for ADHD is vast. So why are we messing about and tinkering in the margins saying we can't afford to treat ADHD? We've got to stop that. Stop that conversation outright and let people be treated for something they need the help with.
It's such a big message to close on. The cost of is greater than the cost of not. The same applies in the workplace. I do a lot of speaking in companies. The cost of not accommodating neurodiversity in the workplace significantly more than the cost of accommodating.
By a country mile. And it's, you know, I think it's 2/3 of my non-clinical workforce are neurodiverse and about 1/3 of my clinical workforce are neurodiverse. What an absolute bloody joy. Yeah, it's been tricky and yeah, it's challenges along the way, but crikey, it wouldn't have it any other way. And you know, I remember one lad, he had a job description and he couldn't meet it. And we could have fired him, but actually recognised he was neurodiverse. He didn't know at the time, recognised he was neurodiverse. And I said, right, what are you good at? What do you want to do? And he adds value every single damn day to the organisation, doing half the stuff that other people don't want to do. It's not rocket science to get. It's not that difficult. People want a break. Let them have a break. It's not a bad thing to have a break, is it? To go outside. When I take the dog to work, they queue up to go and walk my dog on the break. They literally, like, can we take Charlie out? Can we take Charlie out? You know, those kind of things. Why would you not? You don't just provide a break for someone who's neurodiverse. Provide a break for everybody.
Exactly, yeah. You see the penny drop moment when I'm having these conversations. And I say, people, they're not convinced. Why should I spend money on basic accommodations when, and then you say, well, 60% of neurodivergent people will leave in 3 months if there aren't very basic things to mitigate the anxiety.
Then you've got to recruit, advertise, recruit, start again. You've got
suddenly
all that
they realise the
churn.
bottom line will hurt if they don't.
Absolutely. You know, let people wear headphones, block out the noise. Not just for neurodiverse people. We all need space. If people aren't in single offices, some people with neurodiversity don't want to be in an office on their own. They want to be in a lively office. Some don't want to be in a lively office. They want to be in their office. And I didn't give a flying fig. You know, let's just make it work.
Yeah. I could talk to you all day, Phil, about accommodations. I want to reveal your ADHD item. I'm going to lean over now and reveal it. That looks. Now, I had to Google what a pomegranate looked like because I realised how ignorant I was towards fruit. It is a fruit.
It is.
A fruit? Okay, it is a fruit. So that's a pomegranate. Why does a pomegranate represent ADHD?
So there's two reasons for this. One is quite emotive. I worked for 2 years in the NHS clinics for ADHD, seeking to improve their efficiency and effectiveness. And the holy grail was to find the perfect clinic, which I never found. So I ended up with a small team of colleagues. I led a team to publish a paper on what excellence in an ADHD clinic looked like. And that became the genesis of ADHD 360. And we needed to name the report, so we named it Pomegranate. Now you can wonder what the hell's he talking about here. But so here we are. You didn't know what it looked like. Okay, so there's ADHD. You didn't know what it looked like. To the common person, they don't know what it looks like, do they? ADHD or a pomegranate. There's a straight comparison there. What you do know that inside here, there's loads of little red pips, aren't there? And that's what you would normally see as pomegranate.
Yes.
So you would see some of the manifestations of the ADHD, but never actually see the whole. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's another correlation and comparison there. It goes even further. If you don't process a pomegranate properly, you lose a lot of the vitamins. Pomegranate juice has less vitamins than the pomegranate pip. And the processing of it into something that becomes easier to consume and easier to accept changes its whole construct and its value, and it devalues it. Well, let's take that back to the world of ADHD again. So for me, this represents a seminal part of my life when I published that report, What Does Excellence in an ADHD Clinic Look Like?, which led to me setting up 360. But also the inextricable links between this simple fruit and how we define it. In Greek mythology, the pomegranate was given as a gift of wealth. It was something that was attributed to actually having more than anybody else. And I think that's my final word on why the pomegranate and ADHD, because this just looks like any old tatty old fruit bought from Morrison's or wherever this morning. But actually, if this represents ADHD and represents a gift of wealth, we should never take away from a person with ADHD what their actual gift to society and themselves can be, and not just look for impairment and things that are symptomatically wrong, but actually look for the value, and the value's in here.
Amazing. I feel like I've been educated on what is a pomegranate to start with, but also another beautiful analogy. So thank you, Phil. I want to do the ADHD agony aunt, finally. The ADHD agony aunt, which is called the washing machine of woes, because my ADHD item is the washing machine, because I always leave my clothes in the laundry. And I ask everyone, do you leave your clothes in the laundry?
I wouldn't even know where our laundry is. I've got the most amazing, supportive wife who runs behind everything that I do. You know, it sounds incredibly sexist, doesn't it? I do know where the washing machine is, of course I do, but I don't use it. She does. I'm out working 12, 14 hours every day, 7 days a week, traveling here, there, and everywhere. Do I leave my washing in the washing machine? No. Do I air my dirty linen in public?
Yeah.
Yes, symptomatically quite a lot. I think the point there is that for anybody to be truly successful, a person with ADHD or a person without, you've got to have the right support around you, haven't you? I believe ADHD 360 is successful at what it does. And as a CEO, I know damn well I couldn't do it without the people around me who are taking my washing out the washing machine. You know, I've got my secretary, Lucy, I've got my leadership team, I've got my support at home. I'm neurotypical, but I would still be leaving my washing machine here, my washing here, there, and everywhere if I didn't have the right people behind me. And I think the pomegranate people, the people with ADHD, will do a lot better if they've got people around them helping them not leave their washing in the washing machine.
Yeah, 100%. It's about finding out what your strengths and your weaknesses are and delegating. Because otherwise you're just going to take on all of it yourself.
You can't do that.
Crash.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Tiimo app is something that's genuinely helped me do what I'm really bad at. Tiimo is a productivity app that reminds me to empty my washing machine and a number of other things that enable this podcast to work properly.
And do you listen to the app? Because often we hear with people with ADHD that the calendar will go and say, you've got to take the washing out the washing machine. Yep, click, thank you, move on. And until it's cleared, it's not nagging back at you. So presumably there's something within the Tiimo app that makes you think, I still haven't done that.
Well, it gives me a nudge. My phone makes a noise and it brings the washing machine into my now.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I go upstairs, I move on with my life and I forget. And I only get reminded when I walk past the washing machine the next morning. But by that time, the cycle needs to be done again because it's gone bad. So it's a cost of having to do another cycle, which is a couple of quid in the electricity bill.
But it's also time without the clothes you want, isn't it? It's time without having the access to you have a uniform, you have an Alex look, the Alex Partridge look. And if that's stuck in the washing machine, you're going to buy more clothes to make sure you've got a cycle of clothes to keep the look and the uniform.
Well, luckily I wear pretty much the same thing. Well, I've got like 10 versions of the same thing. So they're always clean. I wear the same thing all the time and people must think I smell. No, I'm not that bad. This week, Phil, in the washing machine of woes, someone has written in and asked, my child is always in trouble at school, always, and it's getting worse. I'm worried this might translate to them becoming an addict or even a criminal. What advice would you give me to help them get off that trail?
Wow. Well, the first thing is that child's not going to be happy if they're always getting into trouble. So what we've got to look at is, well, how can we make that child happy? And if you think about the conversations we've had through this interview, you can't tell the child to be happy. Can't tell that if it's an ADHD child, don't misbehave, don't get into trouble. That's going to get you nowhere. But we should be looking at those around who are charged with the responsibility to give that child their best life, whether that's in education standards, outcomes in life, society. What are you doing that can make that child happy? We had a child who on their that pre-entry into our clinic was getting detentions, it said, for not taking a pen to class. So why wouldn't a teacher just take a bag of pens and give the child a pen as opposed to a detention?
Yeah, it sounds like a simple solution.
Yeah, so punitive. So whatever that child's doing to get into trouble, then why don't we see how we can work to make sure that doesn't happen, as opposed to putting the responsibility on someone who's presumably, by the question being asked in this context, neurodiverse, and no matter how often you tell that person to take their pen, they're going to forget their pen. So I don't think the responsibility lies with the parent or the child. I think it lies with those who are charged with the responsibility to do better.
Amazing advice. Thank you, Phil. Just finally, we've got one final bit to do. That is, I'm going to deliver you a letter that was written by the previous guest. Yeah, every week, our guest writes 3 rules to live by, and they put it in this envelope, post it in that post office, and I deliver it to today's guest, which is you. And if you could kindly read it. Thanks, Phil.
So do I get to know who wrote this?
You can do. That was a lady called Sam Bramwell, who is going... Sam Bramwell. She's an ADHD. She was a tech CEO, but now ADHD advocate coach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the three rules to live by, it says, befriend your nervous system. That's interesting. Laugh and dance a lot. Practice gratitude and self-compassion. Yeah. Now they're really they're strong, but they're not, they're not purely for the neurodiverse community, are they? Befriend your nervous system. We all should know ourselves, shouldn't we? Laugh and dance. Yeah, if only. We could all do with more of that, couldn't we? Although dad dancing is frowned upon in my family. And practice gratitude and self-compassion. I think that's really important for the ADHD community, though. You know, that inner chimp, that situationally pissed off. Got to learn to manage that.
Be a lot after laugh and dance. Was that your edition?
No, it's there.
That was there.
Yeah, it's there. So that's very heartfelt, isn't it? From somebody that presumably needs to laugh and dance or wants to laugh and dance more. And I don't know how you feel when I read them out. I'm always frequently tinged with a little bit of sadness when discussing ADHD, because I think a lot of people with ADHD don't laugh and dance and have lost the art of being themselves. And I think that's something that we can all help people live by the rule. Allowing people to be themselves is the greatest gift we can give people.
Absolutely. And hopefully hearing you speak today and following the amazing work that you're doing with ADHD 360 will enable some people, after years and years and years of masking, pretending to be someone, betraying their true self, to go the other way.
And be.
Yeah.
Hope so.
Phil, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.